started here. My name is Blake Kimsey. I am the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas up here in Dallas. And I cannot believe we've been doing this for 3 years when David Samuel Levinson,
I love it.
also matches Steve's book cover, just like
Yeah.
Mandy. When,
Wait, what? I do?
Yeah, you and Mandy are dressed for Remember This.
Thank
Oh,
you
yeah.
for doing this for me. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all for you, man. Hi,
Good
Mandy.
work.
Hi.
So David had this great idea for a book club during the pandemic. And so we did that for a while. Then we just changed it to the Big Texas Author Talk. And so we're just kind of keeping it going and having these great conversations. So I'm really happy that Writing Workshops Dallas has gotten to know Gemini Ink through David. So thank you very much. We always love to thank our sponsors here. We have a grant from Humanities Texas, which allows us to run this series, which is pretty phenomenal. And thanks to Gemini Ink for always doing the grant writing for that, which is awesome. And thanks to our wonderful authors who are here tonight, Ramona Reeves and Steve Adams. So I'm going to let Mandy say a little bit about Gemini Ink, and then I'll do a formal introduction for both Steve and Ramona, and then we'll be off to the races. So thanks. Thanks, Mandy.
Good deal. Thank you. My name is Mandy Landon. I'm the public class coordinator for Gemini Ink. We're San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. So it is our duty to help teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels to help them bring their stories to life. And just as every month, we're really excited to be here partnering with Writing Workshops Dallas and, funded by Humanities Texas to have this monthly conversation where we talk about the craft of writing with Texas connected authors. So thank you, Steve and Ramona, for being here. And Blake, I'll let you introduce them.
Okay, here we go. Well, we are very happy to have tonight's discussion lead, our moderator, Ramona Reeves, who is the winner of the 2022 Drew Hines Literature Prize for her interlinked short story collection, It Falls Gently All Around and Other Stories, which was published by University of Pittsburgh Press last October. Ramona's work has appeared in New South's Micro Series, Southampton Review, Pembroke, Bio Magazine, Superstition Review, Texas Highways, and others. And you can also find out more information at Ramona Reeves' website. Thank you for being here tonight, Ramona.
Thank you.
Being in conversation with Steve Adams, whose creative nonfiction has won a Pushcart Prize, been listed as notable in Best American Essays, and published in The Pinch, The Millions, and elsewhere. In fiction, he's won Glimmer Train's Short Story Award for New Writers, and his stories have been anthologized and published in Glimmer Train, the Missouri Review, and elsewhere. He's been a guest artist at UT, a resident at Gentile, and a scholar at the Norman Mailer Writers Colony. And his plays have been produced in New York City. His debut novel, Remember This, was published in October 2022. And Steve is a writing coach and a freelance editor who lives in Memphis. Thank you all both so much for being here tonight. I'm going to hand it over to you and spotlight you. And so if you have any questions for Steve or Ramona, put those in the chat, and we'll be sure to get those at the end when we have some Q&A. Ramona, Steve, thanks.
Thank you, Blake, and also Mandy, and thank you, Steve, for asking me to moderate tonight. I'm so excited to talk about your novel, Remember This. And I'll just let folks know that we met probably a decade ago when you were in Austin. You actually helped me stay accountable with getting the first draft of my book done, the one that was just published. And we reconnected last year, and we found out we had a book coming out about a month apart. And we appeared up in Terabang together in the fall, and then this came along and you said, hey, do you want to moderate? And I said, man, that would be great. So here I am. Do you want to, would you like to say a few things, Steve, before we get into the discussion?
I just want to thank, thanks Ramona for doing this. This makes it, extra fun for me. And it's fun how we reconnected after a bit of time. I definitely want to thank Blake and Writers Workshop Dallas, and Mandy and Gemini Ink. I mean, as you get out in the world with the book and you realize that you need an infrastructure to support you so people can find out about a book. And it doesn't happen by accident. You kind of think it does. You think it's always going to be there, but it's people who love literature, and I'm sure they don't get paid as much as they should, and they work anyway, so that there's going to be a forum like this where Ramona and I can appear, and I really appreciate it. So thanks, guys. So
So
and
we'll get to
yeah,
it.
let's roll. Yeah.
So I'm, like I said, I'm really excited for readers. People who've read your book already know how great it is. People who are here, who are checking out your book for the first time, I'm really excited for them because it's just beautifully written. And part of that beauty is the way that you render place, which we've talked about before. And for those who haven't read your book, it moves between two timelines, New York City in the 1980s, and then Texas in the 1960s to the early 80s, until the whole thing sort of begins to dovetail. So it's very much, I mean, to me, a novel of place. Can you talk about how you arrived at those two timelines and a little bit about your characters?
Yeah. And this is probably the longest question or longest answer I'll have tonight, but it's really important. And I was real pleased when people have called this a love letter to New York City. It is. So there are, what did I say? It's, people wonder, oh, is this autobiographical and stuff? And it's not, but I use the framework of my life, kind of just as a scaffolding. So for instance, I lived in, Texas, and I moved to New York City. New York City was a really, really important place for me. It still is. I'm kind of a New Yorker in exile, and a Texan, and a Southerner. I'm all of these things. But I've lived in New York City 3 times, and I was there during the period that this novel is set. It's set in a summer of 1988, and I was there probably from 86 to 91 or 92. And it was just, I kind of came into myself there. It was one of the most meaningful times of my life. And it was beautiful and tragic. I mean, AIDS shadowed everything, and I was writing plays and, have a good day job and running around and seeing these little productions and my actor friends. And it was just such a dynamic, and it was a grittier New York too. I mean, you just got used to prostitutes and pimps and people selling drugs on Times Square with all the glamour of the theaters too. So this whole thing was just mixed together, and you just learned to move through it. So I've never, if I probably were to go to relive a time of my life, probably it would be that period. So it would make sense that I would at some point want to write about it. And so the story of how this happened was, I was living in New York City in 2008 when the economy collapsed, and my job got kicked over to India. There was no work anywhere. It was really rough, and I couldn't get another job, and I knew I'd have to leave. And I had a string of months left on my lease for my apartment, and so I just wandered the city for those months. And like my character John does in the book, he wanders a lot. And, I was taking notes and just putting down impressions. And, I felt a novel start to form. But you can't hang a novel on some sad guy wandering around, going to miss a city. It's just not enough, even no matter how deeply I felt it. So the idea came to me of a character who was in love with a married woman. She's probably the love of his life, a married woman who has an 18-month-old daughter, and they have 2 months together. So they know that. So this is kind of the clock on the main storyline. And so I said, okay, I'm going to write about this love affair and the arc of it, and I could use that to shape it. And so I wrote that out just as everything is collapsing in my life, and I left New York with a rough draft, and literally because again, the job situation was rough in Texas too, not as bad as New York, but I crash landed in my parents' home, and where I am right now. And I worked on getting that draft polished, and I thought I had a novel there. And I sent it to an editor who did not respond positively, and she was harsher than she should have been. But sometimes sometimes they say you get the teacher you need, not the teacher you want. And in my case, because I had credits, so it didn't completely destroy me, but I really was counting on this book. And so anyway, once I crawled out from under the bed from the reaction, I started thinking about what was wrong. I've never been able to give up on this book. It's been a long journey. But I realized I needed another focal point or another lens to look at John, the protagonist, so that we understand why he's this guy who's involved with a married woman, and not only involved with her, why he's a guy who tends to be the other man in his relationships. And I'm giving this away a little bit. The women pick him. He doesn't go chase, but they come to him. So that's kind of what happens. And I wanted to, what can I say? I wanted to come up with a reason and a why for that. So I was stuck in this situation. I wanted this, and I was actually talking to my younger sister. So those of you who've read this know that the sibling thing is really strong, but again, it's not autobiographical. And I was talking to my single younger sister, who's 6 years younger than me, and she about what to do with this. How do I make people understand why John is the way he is? And she mentioned Jack Nicholson having a really complicated relationships with older sisters, and he's kind of the baby of the family, and some stuff like that. And it just started kicking around in my head. And I had a chance to go back to New York, and I needed to see it like one more time. And some friends of mine were leaving. They had a couch I could sleep on. So they said, hey, if you want to come back, now's the time before we move out. So I put frequent flyer miles together and decided I'm going to go back for, one more shot, which I really needed to do. And I swear, it's just as the plane was like lifting off or going down the runway, I got an image of this 5-year-old boy who's John, and his 3 much older sisters. They are 6 years older and 8 years older and 10 years older than him. So it's like formed almost a diamond shape in my mind. I see things in shapes a lot. But John's down here at the bottom, right? And these 3 sisters. And I suddenly knew this is the family. This is the family he was raised in. And and I'm like, okay, so then what do? I started working on it. I get the father off stage. So he dies right off the bat. And then the mother is an emotionally unavailable alcoholic. So she's really off stage too. So the family is basically a family of siblings. And I put them in a town back in Texas, like that's, similar. I mean, they're different, but New Braunfels is a sweet town, and it's kind of close to Austin. It wasn't big back then, and that felt right. So I put that there. So those were the 2 main places. Now, the New York part is very much external. You're seeing the city, you're seeing all the shadows, all the light, all this stuff constantly. But the New Braunfels place, that's all interior. It's all in the home, because that's where the stuff is going on between these kids and dealing with their mother. So those are the 2. And then it slides over for you, Texans and Austinites. When he leaves home, because everyone leaves home one after the next, and he basically takes on the big roles of trying to get his sisters out of the house, because they all have this like fairy tale they tell each other about how each are going to leave one after the next and get out of this stultifying house. So when he finally is able to get out of there, he goes to UT in Austin, and that's around 1982, 83. I lived there then, and it was just a great scene, and I loved it. It's the music, and I worked at the first Whole Foods, and everybody was just crazy and wild, and so I knew I had a setting that I really could explore and develop and work there. So we had the Armadillo World headquarters, the end of that, Raoul's, Club Foot, Continental Club, and I mean, and there are a dozen other clubs that are really interesting I could talk about, but there are all in it. So those are the times. So I'm writing about Austin and New York City, and this house where the second storyline, which is John as a child, it starts weaving that together with the adult, which is the main story. So that's basically the structure. And Ramona, I'm going to ask you if that was clear enough. Did that read to you, or was it too complicated?
No, that definitely read to me. And I was going to say I felt like if I didn't know how the book came together, I would assume that you had written the whole thing as one piece from the get-go. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of times, you know, when you hear writers talk, it seems like, oh, it just, you know, must have just magically all sort of come together in this one story. And, you know, a lot of times there's just a lot of work and a lot of figuring things out before you get to that place.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it really works. I was interested in both timelines when I was reading the novel. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. One of the things I wanted to ask about too, besides place, and before I forget, is you mentioned rhyming action before to me, and I know what I think of rhyming action is, but I wondered if you could just it's one of those writer crafting things, I know, but if you could talk about what you think it is and how you think it's working in your novel, and the effect that it helps to create.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably those of us who think in those terms have our own version of what it means, you know, because I think it's a little bit slippery. But I read, and I don't know if this is who came up with it first, but this book, I don't know when it came out, but it's probably about in 2002 when I read. It's Charles Baxter has a book about writing theory. It's like one essay after the next. It's brilliant. And there are two that I remember, and I haven't read it in a long time, but two that I remember so specifically. One is where he talks about, I wrote it down because I never remember the word melodrama for some reason. It's probably a psychological reason, but he has a brilliant essay on melodrama, which I'm not going to talk about. But he also had this thing about rhyming action, and it just hit home with me because I started, speaking of like a circuitous route, like with this novel, I started with poetry. And I thought that's all I was going to do for a while. And then I got into playwriting, and I thought that's all I was going to do. And then to turn through screenwriting. And way late, I suddenly realized, oh, it's prose. This is where I'm supposed to be. It took me a long time. But I learned, you know, I know that the poetry and how to construct a poem and all this stuff has influenced my prose too. So the idea of rhyming action, I mean, it's a simple idea, but everything's kind of around metaphor. But it's where you have something that repeats, generally an action. And if you're talking a novel, over a long book, it kind of builds. So for instance, in my book, when John is a child and each of his three sisters, he's trying to send them off away to be free in the world. And each time he's running after them behind their car and like pushing their car. And he's a little guy, he's a little kid. And he's yelling, go, 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 go. You know, that's what he does. And he hears the sound of his feet against the pavement. And so each of those is different with each of those sisters. But it sets in the reader this sonic metaphor and this movement. So when in the adult story later on, John finds himself running down, in a very dramatic scene, running down a street in a bad part of New York City, and he hears the sound of his footsteps. It echoes back to all this stuff with his sisters, and it just really, I mean, it resonates, and it's a way of doing this. And the reader might not even remember this whole thing with his sisters, but they might too. But the point is like it creates a thing where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. If this works right, it all adds and creates this resonance and impact. Another thing, this is just a quick one, is he's this little boy who loves his sisters. I want to emphasize that he loves his sisters so dearly, and he's helping them to be pretty for boys, and helping that he's talking to their boyfriends and making sure they're okay. He's acting like dad in a way, and he's this little guy, and he brushes their hair. He loves brushing their hair. So it's a sensual thing, and he sees how they put on makeup. He starts seeing there because he becomes an artist, and this is where he's getting visual. He's getting an education in shadow and shape and in color, right? Doing that as a child. So with all the hair, there's a lot of hair in this book. All of that kind of is a rhyming sort of action thing too. and I'm just going to throw this in too, because it just reminds me of it. And I've heard screenplay writers talk about this stuff, which again is related. And you don't have to have like an exact definition, but it all stimulates ways to create, resonant work. So this would be an image system. Again, you can see how that's related. So I'm just going to say it can be just an image system can be a series of images that appear in a work which build and kind of create an impact over the work. And again, you see it in screenplays or film a lot. And for instance, I had someone come up and talk to me at a reading about my book, and she came up to me, and this is how, you don't always know what you're doing, you just do it. And she was really excited by the book, and she basically said she wished she was in an English class, could write a paper about the use of windows in the book. And I was like, windows in the book? I never thought about it. But then I thought about it, and they're everywhere, especially in New York. You could almost call New York City a city of windows. And I write it that way, but I wasn't conscious of it. And look, my book cover, I'm going to hold it up. It's a window on my book cover. So you don't always have to know, but if you know, then you can be conscious about it after you get drafts, you start working at it. But I'm just real fascinated by the ideas of rhyming action and image systems and this sort of thing. So that's what I got.
Yeah, no, that's it seems like it's working on the beneath the surface. There's like the surface, and then there's like what's going on beneath there that create different layers, maybe even like
yeah.
So you've mentioned a lot of different things. It seems like it's a good time to ask you to read. You want to read some?
Yeah, I'll take off and read. And just again, because the way I wrote this, I've got the two stories that are echoing and interweaving throughout it. Context becomes really important. So I had trouble just pulling something out of the middle and it working. So I'm just going to start from the opening, read the first, read some pages up front. So here we go. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink. New York City, 1988. It was a Saturday night. It was summer, and I rode the subway to meet her, not thinking it through. If anything, doing my best to not think it through. I was actually irritated at losing most of a precious Saturday night. My downtown 6 train stopped at Union Square, where I stepped off to switch to the Express. Couples going out on dates and clutches of young people waited on the platform laughing, looking forward to the evening. 2 black kids beat rhythms with drumsticks on white plastic tubs turned upside down, and the cadence reverberated off the concrete walls. Everyone moved to it, whether they knew it or not. An uptown 6 local screeched into the station on the opposite platform. Nearby, a Middle Eastern man in a gray suit dropped a quarter into a payphone and began yelling over the noise into the receiver. My right heel tapped against the floor. I was wound up, though I told myself there was no reason to be. She and I were friends. I was doing her a favor. Jeremy had no doubt stopped by to see her too, probably more than once. We'd watch the movie, then I'd leave. I looked down the tunnel and spotted the headlights of an approaching downtown 4 Express. A moment later, it barreled in front of me, pulling with it a wall of wind and heat. A stream of white kids poured out its doors, and I squeezed past them and sat. Most of the riders remaining in the car were Black or Latino, and like me, headed to Brooklyn. I was white with long dark hair, slightly built, 28, from Texas, and on my way to watch a movie with my boss, my friend, after she'd gotten stuck at home with her baby. The yellowing walls of the car were scarred with graffiti and street iconography, slashes and streaks of Krylon spray paint. We pulled from the station and into the tunnel, rattling, shaking down the line. It would have been better if we'd met at Union Square like we'd planned and caught a film there. 2 hours and maybe a drink, and I would have done my bit. But here I was, on work duty on a Saturday night with no pay. The train squealed to a stop at Brooklyn Bridge, where more people boarded. Then the metal doors closed, and we were off again to Fulton Street, then Wall Street, and the last stop in Manhattan, Bowling Green. The doors opened. A few late shift workers straggled in. She'd been going stir crazy alone with the baby all these days, she told me, and just wanted to have a night out, but would feel self-conscious sitting in a movie theater by herself. And we were friends after all, had worked together 3 years at this point. So what's the big deal of meeting for a movie in the city? More than anything, she just wanted to have a normal conversation with a grown-up, have a drink. But her sitter canceled at the last moment. When she'd phoned to tell me, she'd sounded so disappointed. She had hesitated. A moment hung between us. Then I told her I had no other plans, and if she wanted, I could rent a video. I'd bring it over. It wouldn't be the same as going out, but at least she could talk to a grown-up. You really wouldn't mind, she asked? But taking the subway all the way out to Brooklyn, getting back, my night would be shot. Maybe I could take a cab back to Manhattan, hit a bar along the way. My fingernails tapped the plastic seat beside me. Rat-a-tat-tat, tat-a-tat-tat-tat. I noticed this. Noted it, pulled my hand into my lap and held it still. I needed to settle down. Instead of asking myself why, I stared through the marred windows of the car. The station walls were painted red-orange with black trim against a cream background. The colors shone starkly. All the stations I passed and had passed each day on the subway must have had their own specific color themes. I'd failed to notice until now. Until this night. The train pulled away and we went down. We went under the water, under the deep mud of the Hudson toward Brooklyn and hurtled through the straight, dark pass. The subway conductor thought he was a cowboy, gunning it, and the clatter was deafening as the wind gyrated through the open windows. A couple of Latina girls wearing electric colors stood at the back of the car, clutching silver handrails, grinned as they were jerked back and forth like dolls on strings. The lights went out and I sat in the darkness and racket. Then they flashed on again, then off, then on. And finally, the conductor cut the speed and we slowed, rising to the other side. My stomach fluttered from the shift in pace, from a rush of anxiousness at arriving in Brooklyn when there should be nothing to be anxious about. Except that she and I worked together, and she was my boss. Though somehow she never made us think of her like that. We loved her for it, did our jobs as well as we could, so she never had to remind us and break the spell. There was nothing to be anxious about, I told myself. The boundaries were established long ago, though she got to me at first. It wasn't easy to shake off. I thought about the movie I'd chosen, Louis Malle's Atlantic City. I'd seen it before. It's a beautiful film. But there's that scene where Susan Sarandon takes off her shirt and washes herself with lemon juice over her sink, not knowing Burt Lancaster's watching her from across the way. It was too sexy. I'd made a mistake. She'd get the wrong idea. I'd tell her, I'd explain. The movie was great, but the director's French, and maybe she had another video to watch instead because this might be inappropriate. I loved it, but I wasn't thinking. I'd apologize and she'd let it go. She'd probably even want to watch it more then, but I would have diffused any misunderstandings. It wouldn't mean anything and we could laugh about it and watch the movie like grown-ups. Then I'd take a taxi and salvage an hour of Saturday night before going home. That's how it would go. My fingers tapped the seat beside me again and I pulled them back into my lap. It would have been better if we'd met in the city. My hand found its way to my belly and I breathed into it. It would all be fine. She had a baby and a husband. I turned my attention to the station walls, those incredible old city walls that were even dirtier, buried under even more layers of soot than Manhattan's, but the color themes were still prominent, and I spotted insignias on the wall for each station we passed. Borough Hall with the top BH in an old serif font inside an indigo box. Nevins with a simple white N for a logo. Atlantic Station with a black A and a white circle with gold filigree. Bergen, a white B on violet in a pale green frame. They were stunning, hidden under grime. What would it have been like to ride the subway in 1904 when the system opened? The train stopped at Grand Army Plaza and I stepped off. When it pulled away, it revealed the insignia hidden behind it, a mustard P against a charcoal background. I was a designer, a typographer by avocation, if not by profession. I stared at this icon, at these walls, and realized, once again, I was still only waking in this city. Scratch a surface and God knew what you'd find. 2 trains reeled in and out of the station behind me. My nerves jangled and my adrenaline increased. Finally, I turned, walked up the concrete steps and into the night. Down the long slope of Flatbush Avenue, the old Williamsburg Savings Bank building and its narrow clock tower rose, dark and taller than everything around it, a few of its office windows lit. Below, car lights twinkled, flashed red and white as the string of traffic lights above them rippled from green to yellow to red. I walked downhill, turned right at the first corner, and continued up a dark, quiet, tree-lined street toward a red brick structure at 223 Sterling Avenue. A small courtyard separated 2 wings of the building, and through the glass, a single vase of purple irises stood against a beige wall on a vacated doorman's desk. Inside the first set of doors, I examined the list of names on a small silver panel to find Marino 7C. I hesitated at pressing the black square button beside it, feeling as if 2, 3, 4, God knew how many parts of myself were watching. As each began to clarify, to take on traits, specifics, I worked harder to ignore them. The feline one, the canine, the one waiting in shadows, the one laughing at how dense I could be. One was female, her head tilted and her eyes slit expectantly. One was a child blinking in the light, while stronger, surer hands led it forward. Thanks. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much for reading that, Steve. So much is going on in that passage, and you can feel John. I mean, I can feel John's nerves as you're reading that, and the deep perspective, and just and also just the way that you're blending the past and the present. It's really great. So thank you so much. And yet there's more. I will say. One thing that's not in that passage that I'll ask you about is, so during this time, it's the late 80s in the New York timeline, New York part of the novel, and the AIDS epidemic is going on. And John and Elena have a coworker who that affects greatly. And for me, that character's losses and the losses John experiences, all of that, and that being in the background really seemed like it raised the emotional stakes of the novel. I just wondered how you thought about it, how you thought about that time interacting with your fictional world, and how you put all that together or came up with the idea.
Yeah, I mean, again, I was there then, and everyone that was there then that was paying any attention, I mean, I think everyone was affected by this. You had to, you wanted a love life, right? But what this would I mean, again, it was just so intense. You would be all jacked up on beautiful people, and maybe you're dating someone and you're excited and you're wondering where this is going to go, and you turn and you run into someone who's visibly dying from this on the street, in the subway. You know, it's everywhere. Again, I was in theater, so it was just, your heroes are dying from this while you're still trying to, it's like love is a risk. We want it to not be a risk, but it's risky in and of itself. And in this book it is for John and Elena. And I just, to do that time, truly, I wanted to bring this element in as well, and have it. I mean, because it just, back then it felt like it shadowed everything, and you had to figure out how brave you were going to be about this. And there were times I'd be so freaked out, like, I can't date anyone. And then I'd have to, no, I can't live like this, and have to fight through. And I wanted Jeremy, I mean, there are 3 really strong, I mean, he's one of the 3 main characters in the adult section. And he's this gorgeous, charismatic gay man who Elena loves dearly. They have one of those real intimate relationships, friendships that you see like that, and they all have and they're all kind of like John and Jeremy, or they're kind of jealous of whoever's getting attention from Elena, and Elena's kind of, it's subtle, but this stuff goes on in offices, and so they all kind of a little bit in competition for with each other, and they're all kind of in love with each other. They're about the same age. They all like Jeremy's a photographer, and John is like a poster designer becoming an artist. And Elena, it's what she does with fashion, with makeup, and she creates these effects. And so they have all this in common. And as the story progresses, I mean, like someone said, it's almost like a love triangle, and it is. Jeremy kind of, he's mischievous and charming in that way, and he kind of elbows them together a little bit, and then it happens, and he becomes confidant to both of them about this. So he's I really, that relationship, the way the three work together is real important to me, and it just seemed, again, I don't know how you don't write about this. How do you don't write about AIDS and what all that meant, and write about this time, especially in New York City or San Francisco or someplace like that. So it's just a part of what was there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this question is sort of connected. And so the adult part of the book, as you're calling it, New York, there's this intense love affair. And so a core of that are, that you're going to have to write sex scenes. And, we talked about this. Do we go there? Do we not go there? But I think it's something writers, it's not an easy thing to write. And you did have to write multiple ones for this particular novel. And so were you intimidated by that? Were you worried about writing them? How did that go? And do you have any advice?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this. Honestly, I was scared shitless, gonna say shitless. I was scared shitless to write these things. But once I knew that I was going to write this story, I knew that this was what it was about. And I would have to go directly at it and not flinch, because flinching is like you're walking a tightrope. It's kind of you're walking a tightrope with these, and you don't look down. That's then you're screwed. And I knew again to go directly at them. And I have a thing with writing. If I'm afraid of something, if there's fear in something, I move towards that, because often there's a charge there, and something that has a lot of energy for me that I should explore. I mean, the great thing about writing is that you never have to show it to anybody. You can just go there and see what you can find, and then you can make it feel safer to you and do it. But with this case, because it really is about love and desire connected, and John has a really delicate eye, but he sees. He's a visual artist, and so I knew that to describe them delicately but directly and truthfully through him, his experience of it, go deep into the heart of his experience and how he feels for this woman and the impact she has on them. And I just needed to go directly into this, or this book wasn't going to work. And I think about it, I don't know how many, they spend a lot of time next to each other in bed or wherever. I'm trying to think, it feels like I've got about 5 sex scenes between them, and which is a lot. And then there's a couple of other with women, young women before him, but those are kind of different. So it's kind of like the way I manage this is, here are my tips. If you want to try this at home, kids, here are my tips. The first thing, and it's going to seem kind of obvious, but it helps you, I think, just to have the courage to go ahead and write them and know that you can design these so they actually have impact if you're going to have several of them. I mean, the first thing, if I didn't have to have one of these in a book, I wouldn't put it in there. I wouldn't just throw one in. Like, I once heard a director talk about, and I think it's true, that 9 out of 10 times when you go to a movie and there's a sex scene, the action, the narrative just stops cold. And people don't think about it because these are actors and they're pretty and they're, we kind of want to see that, but it really doesn't often have a whole lot to do with the story. And that's a real danger. And in a book where we don't have cameramen and beautiful actors doing this stuff, and the reader's building the story inside their head, you can't afford just to have a dead scene like that. That's when people will judge it. And that's the big fear that I had, and we all have when we write this, is that, like our Aunt Lucy's looking over our shoulder, going to judge us for our sex scene that we wrote. And you got to get rid of that. So what I think is that first you want to make sure that, and this just makes sense, but that every sex scene needs to be different than the other ones. They need to have a difference. And and each one should show us something different about the characters in them. We should get to know something about the characters from seeing them there that we didn't know before. And then the third thing is that, I mean, if you can do it all, that's really what you want to do. The story should turn with the sex scene too. So there's something in the story should move forward, just like the narrative should always be moving forward through every scene. Ideally, right? Nothing's perfect, but that's what we want. So if you can do all those things, and it doesn't have to be as, big and dramatic as I'm saying. I mean, let's say you're writing a story, about, a love story about a couple getting together, and maybe there's only one sex scene, and it's at the, let's say the 25% end of Act 1 moment. They have a sex scene there, and it's the only one. And it doesn't have to be designed like I'm designing this whole arc of these things, right? But let's say the couple, they get together, they have sex, and you don't have to show a whole lot. Show a little bit, show more, and then the story changes. It keeps going forward. Well, you've shown a little bit, so we've learned something about them from the sex scene, and the story has moving from that. Now they're lovers. They weren't lovers before, so it had story movement, and it's valid. And so that's just the bottom line. It's just make sure that whenever you do it, it has story value, and then the reader won't suddenly realize they're just reading a dead sex scene, which is how you get into trouble with these things. So those are my tips, and good luck to all.
Well, so I'm gonna take us from that back to place just a minute, and then we'll open it up for some questions here. But I did want to ask you also about the Irish pubs. I remember I read your novel, and I told you that I felt like I'd been on a tour of Irish pubs in a good way. Like, but I also noticed, John that's like one of his go-to places. Like he feels at home there. And I started thinking, his mom's was an alcoholic, kind of absentee mom. And I wondered if that was something you set up, or if that just sort of happened, that he felt at home at these places, if that was calling back to his mom or something, or,
Yeah. And frankly, I was glad when you told me you thought it was like in a good way a tour of Irish pubs, because I just wrote it. I wasn't planning this at all. I just know when I'm in New York, I like to go to the pubs, and John needed a place to go. And it's a way and it's a real community there. You engage with people, you can have a beer. It's much, I think it's more like in Europe or in Ireland there. It's less, I mean, it's surreal. It's about getting loaded for people, but it really is about, you can go and have a beer and meet some people, or just talk to them, and then move on. So, but the thing is, I was aware that alcohol and substance is in the book. And we've got the alcoholic mom, and we have a sister that gets into trouble with it too. And so it made sense that John, he kind of self-medicates when he's tense and stuff. He goes, gets a beer, he needs a shift. He goes, gets a beer in the pub where there are people, and he can shift himself. So I was thinking about that. I had not, but I mean, this is perfectly valid. I had not thought to connect that to his mom and childhood in any way. But again, we don't know what we're doing a lot of times when we're writing this stuff. I think we write truly and make the place real and immerse ourselves in it. And things will come in that we weren't planning, just because we're very much there.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I don't know if there are any questions. If there are,
so far we haven't got any questions. If people want to put them in there, I'm always interested in the book's journey, and as an aspiring writer myself, just sticking with the book, and just, can you elaborate a little bit more on the journey that this book took towards publication and sticking with it? And just, I'm struck by how, when you said that the sex scenes, for example, have a particular arc. I mean, all that work going into the manuscript when it's uncertain what it's going to become. And I think a lot of people are interested in that because it's so beautiful. The section you read, the way you crafted the sentences, but how did you stick with that through the kind of ups and downs of radio silence, hearing no? Like, it seems very inspiring to see how the book ended up being published.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, was a long journey. And I mean, this is the argument for not giving up. If you write a book, I mean, the thing is, I love this book. I'll just say that flat out. I love this book. It's very important to me. I have some other novels. It was hard for me to learn how to construct. I mean, and now I edit people's work, but I was a natural short form writer. And for me to learn how to write a long form, which is different, I didn't realize how different it was conceptually, really. It took me a long time. So I've got a couple drafts of novels that are sitting in the drawer, right? But I wrote this one, and I know this is not one that I want to let sit in the drawer. And this is what, and this happens more often than we would like. So I don't want to disillusion anyone, but the argument is that you want to stay with it, and then you can get it published. But I had a good clean draft of this. It was ready to show an agent. Yeah, I'll just say it was in 2014. It was that long ago. And I just won the Pushcart Prize, which is, really throws light on you. And I go, everything is coming together. I'm going to be a famous writer next week. It's all happening. And I got this agent. She was a big agent, and I don't have anything at all bad to say about her. She tried to get it out there, but it was quick, and she's got big clients. She doesn't have a lot of time for somebody who's brand new. And so it was a rather quick round the park, and then it was over. And boy, talk about a crash was after that, because I just, that's why I went under the bed for 3 days and not knowing what to do. So but I crawled out and put it away for, this really is what happened. I put it away for about a year, and I'm working on other things. And, when I finally, the pain was diminished enough, I pulled it out and I reread it. And I'm like, no, I believe in this book. I believe in this book still. It's a good book. And I'd send it out, but I was still pretty raw. I'd send it out to, an agent maybe, or one contest, and get the no's again. And then I'd go back underground, work on other things, and then pull it out in another year and look at it, So I did this, not sending it to a whole bunch of people, because once something gets turned down by big houses, the first time, they have to read so many books, they often will just use that as an excuse to not read it. So it's hard to break in once and they know it's already been somewhere. And but basically, I just kept believing in it. I had a joke that they're going to be burying me in the ground and dead, and I'm still going to go zombie on them, to be shoving the manuscript up through the earth saying, take it, it's good, and so and it was just kind of a random thing that I saw that University of Wisconsin had an open window for manuscripts that didn't have to be agented or asked for, and I just threw it at them. And of course, all through there, I kept editing it, making little edits every time I read it. But and then they got in touch with me, and they wanted it. And it was super great. It was amazing, really. And I worked with them, and we worked on just making it better. So this has been with me a long time, and that's the journey. But here we are. So, bottom line, I'll say, if you love your work, just you might really have to grind it out. It can happen immediately. It can just go right through. You see that happen, or it doesn't. And if you love it, you just stay with it and always write something else in the meantime. So that's my advice on this.
I love that. Does anybody else have any other questions? If you can unmute yourself. I just also want to say, I love that you said that if you're fearful about something writing, you go right toward it. And I feel like that is kind of the it seems counterintuitive, but it's a real strength in the work, right?
Yeah. Because it's real interesting. I have a friend who writes, and with him, he uses the word shame. Like if he finds shame in his work, he goes and explores that, right? If he's ashamed of something, but that's kind of like fear. I like fear better. I kind of come from a fear family. I have to fight through fear. And so for me, it's really a little thing. Like if there's something over there I'm afraid to write about, something's going on over there, and I need to go at it and look at it. And again, I say this because again, I come from a theater background, and talk about exposed actors on stage doing this like live in front of people. But lucky us writers, we get to sit in our room or wherever and just explore this stuff, and we can go to scary places and pull back. And I mean, I'm going to just tell a little bit more about that too. Something I wanted to say. When I got my first draft of this novel down, I was, you know, I can be brave when I write, but when I send it into the world, I'm like, oh my God. My biggest fear was, you know, the fact that this character, I mean, he's really in love. He loves women. He's in love with women and these sex scenes. And I'm like, oh my God, am I gonna be exiled, you know, from this? And I have a friend, and she's a really good writer, and she's really sharp, and she's also tough, and she doesn't suffer fools gladly. And she said she would read it, and she was the first person I sent it to. And really, I was so raw and exposed with it, and I just didn't know. And then she responded so positively to this aspect, because it comes from the heart of the character. That's what made it work for her. And I mean, I just almost, I wanted to cry, just that, my God, I sent it to this woman I respect a lot. And she really, not only did she love the book, but she responded specifically to that aspect. So anyway, that was, but I think if we're not exposing ourselves with our writing somehow, if we're not putting something out there, then why do we expect people to be interested in it? And it doesn't have to be super dramatic, but it has to have meaning for us. Otherwise, it's not going to have meaning for them, I think. So.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. I love it. Does anybody
Yeah.
else have any questions? Or Ramona, do you have any final thoughts?
I do. Hi, this is Jeff Akins, Steve.
Hi, Jeff.
I've really enjoyed this, and Blake, I love this format. So I guess I have two questions. First, how did you evolve, I guess, to where you're helping people with their work? I guess I'm assuming that's your main living.
Yeah.
You know, how did that come about? And then second question, maybe I missed this, but did you have some thought of, I need to write a book even without an idea? Did you feel like it's just something I've got to accomplish in my life?
Wait,
How
what kind of book did you say?
Oh, just a book. Was it something along the lines of, I just have to write a book even before you had an idea?
Yeah.
So is how the book, you did talk about how you came up with this idea, but I'm trying to get to the interval in time before that.
Right. Yeah, actually, I've always wanted to write a book. I just felt there was a need, that I had a book in me, hopefully more. And it's been strong. I mean, like I say, the short form, like I've got stuff out there in short form, but I've never been able to manage a complete, you know, the architectural long book. And I just had a need to do it. And I couldn't give up trying. I spent some years trying to figure this out, studying screenwriting and other things, how to technically do this. How is it done? Just so I could do it. And then you have to have a story that fits. But yeah, it was a drive in there. I mean, I would go to the grave still trying to do that if I hadn't been able to get this one done. How did I get into the writing coaching and editing stuff? The thing, it took a while. Yeah, I mean, it all came out of getting kicked out of New York City and not being able to get a job. And I love talking about writing process and craft. And I'm just a real nerd about it. And it's a good time for me. And I love that when I got my MFA, we'd go out and have, go to a bar and go to an Irish pub and drink beer and talk about writing and all this stuff. So for me, I started, I think one of the reasons I was able to do this is I started with poetry. Then again, I went theater, I studied acting, I studied jazz guitar. Until I discovered poetry, I was doing all this other art stuff, because I knew I needed to do something here. And so what I ended up doing is learning a lot about other art forms. So when I finally figured out way down the road that I was into prose and that I wanted to, I had been exposed to a lot of different ways of looking at art. I also have friends in a lot of painter friends, so I talk to them about it, even though it's really different for me. So I think that's one thing that happened. And I took this, there's this Briggs-Meyer test, and I have the therapy gene, apparently, that they say if you get this sort of numbers show up, you'd be a good therapist. So I've got that, and then a bunch of ways of looking at it. And I'm just really kind of passionate about, again, the writing process. And so you throw losing a job into that, and I scrambled and just started building this thing. And it's how I make my whole living. So I've been lucky about that, but it took a while. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did put Steve and Ramona's websites in the chat, so you can go there and if you haven't ordered their books, they're available there, and then more about Steve's editing and coaching there as well.
I have a question for Steve. Excuse me. Ramona and Steve, I think you both are on my Facebook. You know, you're my friends there. My question is, what is your, I haven't read your book, so what is your book, would you say, is comparable? What other books? Or what books were you influenced by?
Okay.
When you wrote this?
These are older books, but I know there was some impact, and I did read these. But this is going to be terrible. I have really struggled with names. People, my favorite poet, I can never remember his name, or one of them. But The Lover by Duras, thank God I got it, by Marguerite Duras.
Yes.
And it's different, but there's a lot of the similar sort of, I kind of want to write it, you know, kind of a guy's version, something. I mean, they're different, but that is one. And it's a very passionate torrid affair.
Very
That has a lot
intense.
of
Yeah.
emotion.
Yeah.
A couple of others that I like I read the Passion. I mean, this was a really important book for me, but The Passion by Winterson, Jeanette Winterson. It's different, but somehow this influenced me. It's just the stuff that vibrated with me. And also I would throw in that the Hours by Cunningham that came. And these all were, I mean, these are go back some years.
Right.
But there was a feeling with the way he's talking about that time, and it deals with AIDS, and it's in New York and around. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful novel. So I would say those three off the top.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of character-driven kind of story. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I do believe in plot. I mean, I'm a big plot believer because you want people turning the page. You always do. But yeah, they are about characters and emotion and all of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Interiority. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being our Facebook friend, by the way.
Yeah, I checked. Your name sounded familiar, so I checked. You both are my Facebook friends. Good to know you, Texas authors.
Hey, Steve, we have a question in the chat. I'm just going to go ahead and read it because their microphone's not working. But how many revised drafts of Remember This do you have? In other words, how much revision did you do before you sold it? And how do you keep a story fresh while revising multiple times?
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a damn good question. You know, all writers are different. So I'll just say what I have. It's like I can look on to see how, I mean, the number of drafts of this, because once I start changing something, this is going to be inaccurate, because once I start changing something, I save a draft. And I mean, I have no idea. I mean, there's so many drafts of this thing. I shouldn't even go there. But yeah, if I'm going in and I'm altering things like kind of in a big way, I say I'm going to change stuff. I always save a new draft of it. I really have no idea, because I would just kept going over it. How to keep it fresh? Well, here's again, this is just my idea. We always have to figure this stuff out on the fly. If the first draft, I mean, you know, the first couple of drafts, the first draft for me is well, I mean, for everybody probably, it's the really hard one, because you've got to, you know, you don't even know if you're going to finish it, right? And you got to keep just having the faith and keep moving. and heading toward that end. And this is when I'm coaching people, I'm saying, hey, you know, you don't have to bring in the A, like Ramona was saying. We think these things come out like these perfect eggs. Writers don't write novels like chickens lay eggs. It doesn't happen that way. You know, we don't see where the cracks are or where the holes are and all this mess of a first draft. So, and I just don't think that a first draft can come out like that. You have to allow for imperfection. So I tell people, I say, look, man, just give me the C- version of this. I mean, this is what, again, forgetting somebody's name, the shitty first draft, help me. You know what I'm talking about.
And Lamont.
Thank you. And this is a great book. I love that book. But it's so hard to keep in your mind because we see these perfect books and it's the example we have. And it'd be better if we could see early drafts, I think, how they would build up to the final thing. That would be really interesting. But for me to just to keep it going, if I get a draft down and I'm excited by it, then because I mean, again, I've been working at this a long time. Yeah, I get more excited at that point because I have something shaped out and I know I can go through just section by section and make it better, and that I can just pass through it a bunch of times and do it. Now, what to do if people don't respond, if it doesn't hit, and you know, you have this book you wrote, and how do you keep your? I don't know that. Again, I have a couple. Well, my first couple of tries didn't work. They weren't very good, but I needed to get them out to get to the next one, right? You write the book you're writing now so that you get to the next book you're going to write. And sometimes I say you stay at it as long as you can stand to stay at it. And if you just get burned out and you can't do it anymore, get away from it. Like often in a first draft of a novel, a long work, I will I'll get in the middle of it and I'll just be burned out. And I go, I need to do something different. So you can not, you can frankly not just take off a week or go to the beach or something. But I often will write something short in the middle of it. Like I'll have an idea for an essay or a short story, write something short, just something totally different and finish it, because these things wear you down because they're so long. So, you know, so there's little tricks you can do just to kind of stay with it. But I just think you have to, you know, keep the faith. And again, I put this one I put in a drawer for a year, and because it just hurt so bad when it didn't land. And but I couldn't let it go. And that's the sign there. So I pulled it out and read it again. And so that's the thing. Sometimes maybe you can just put it away for a year and write something different, then pull it out and look at it, and you'll see it with fresh eyes. Fresh eyes, I'm making this long, but fresh eyes are a good way to keep the energy moving. That's I think my final solution.
Thank you, Steve. Does anybody else have a question they either want to put in the chat or unmute them? Susan, did you have a question? Let me, I'm asking to unmute you here. Let's see. Can you take yourself off mute? There you go, Susan.
Okay, can you hear?
Yes.
Thank you. It's something about the way you spoke about your book, Steve, that I was thinking of the hours before you even explained how important that that book is to you. And I'm interested in windows also. Like I write poetry, and that could be a connection between them, like in a chapbook. You know, you look out and you see the sky at night, you see birds, you see a neighbor, you know, your mind associations. But I just was amazed that you're so in tune with your work and the way you talk about it that I picked up on the hours that I've just pictured that movie right away.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I just, when I read the book and saw the movie, it's amazing that movie worked. I don't know how you make a movie out of that, but they did. I just felt a real kinship to the story and the language and the tonality and the interconnecting thing, you know. But I just felt, you know, this is one of my brothers out there, you know. It just was like that. So that's real interesting that you're already going there.
I look forward to finding your poetry also.
Oh, thanks. The poetry is so long ago, you can't even find it. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah. I went to these other things, and I love poetry, but it's you can only serve. So I was trying to be a jazz guitarist too. I had to leave that behind, you know,
Your connection.
only
huh?
serve so many gods, right?
I
Yeah.
get that.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really energizing and inspiring.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Susan. Does anybody else have a reaction, a comment, or anything else before we wrap up tonight? Well, thank you for being here, Ramona, Steve. Such an invigorating, inspiring conversation. Thanks to you both, and for great questions, Ramona. I got Steve and Ramona's website links in the chat. We'll send out a video recording of this that we'll post to YouTube. You can reach Ramona and Steve on their website, on Twitter, Instagram, things of that nature. So thank you all for being here. Happy writing, happy reading, and we'll see y'all next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed this.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye, y'all.
Good night.